Homesteaders need to take great care when adding resources from the outside world onto their homestead. One area of complication that we've noticed that's cropped up in just the last few months has been in the area of compost. Now, in most states, you're going to find that there are rules and regulations around commercial composting. They don't let just anybody sell compost on the open market. In fact, in the state of Kentucky, everybody has to be certified who touches compost. If you interact with it in any way, you have to have state certification. So there is strict regulation on exactly how the stuff is produced. We purchased finished compost. We got finished compost. It had been through all of the processes that it was supposed to before it was sold as a finished product. But there were some complications that got created when we added it for our garden beds.
How do you know if your compost is hot? Let me show you an example. We planted this root bed, meaning carrots, beets, whatever that grows underground, back in March, April. We're in the end of May. This bed should be flooded with growth because I overplanted it. Here's my carrots. Carrots are super hard to germinate, and I was excited when I saw all these carrots come up. Yes, they will need thinned, but these carrots have been in since March. They're not going anywhere. My compost is hot and it's stunting the growth. So when I'm talking about a hot compost, that means there's too much nitrogen in it. It hadn't aged properly. Try as we might, we had to have compost, and the stuff we got was not good. Now this is a sweet potato. It's not going to hurt it. However, the chance we're taking on this is we'll get a lot of foliage and not a lot of potato. There is encouraging information, however. This is a mushroom, and this is a happy thing. So when you see the mushroom growth in your compost, that means that the compost is cooling down.
So the hot compost is a common problem, and you've seen those pictures of, big mounds of compost that are being turned and steam's traveling off of this. This stuff really is hot. But when we say hot, we're actually talking about a chemical problem. There is a lot of wood chips in this compost that are not fully broken down yet. And when the bacteria that break that wood chip down get activated, they steal nitrogen from the soil. Well, that's nitrogen that the plant could have used, and now it gets tied up in breaking down the wood chips. Eventually what happens is the fungus comes along, and it grabs a hold of everything else that's going on and frees up that nitrogen again and releases it back to the plants. We had to wait for all of the underground portions of the mushroom to grow. All the hyphae have to spread out throughout the compost and start connecting together. And then when we get a good rainstorm like we've just had, we suddenly see mushrooms popping up. And that's just the fruiting body of the mushroom telling us that underground things are going well for us, and the compost should be cooling down and getting ready to seriously grow some plants.
So as Mike stated, the compost is hot. Let me show you a good example of that. So here in this bed, we don't have any mushroom growth currently. This is a good example of something is wrong with either your soil or the amount of water you're putting on. The good news is the cotyledon, which is the first two leaves that you get on all seeds, is yellow. The first leaf is yellow, but the new leaves coming out are turning green. So this tells me things are changing in the soil, even though I don't have mushroom growth. We had better luck in hot compost planting directly into the soil rather than transplanting an already started plant. And I'll show you later at our tomatoes and what exactly happened to that. So this is one of our strawberry beds. And what I did is strawberries and beans are a good companion plant. They don't compete for the same energy. So I went ahead and planted beans in here. This is what we ended up to begin with. This bean is clearly deficient in minerals. However, I went back and I replanted after this bed had been here for a while, and this is what's coming up. So the soil is getting better. The strawberries in here love the high nitrogen. Go figure. We've even got berries on here. No big deal. But these beans over here that I planted are still struggling. But I do see some brighter green coming out. In fact, it's trying to produce a flower. So this is quite encouraging. My onions, here's a good example. Onions don't normally do this. These tips are fried. These onions should be ready to harvest in another week. We can't see the first bulb. So it's horribly stunted, and they will recover.
How do you know they'll recover?
Let me tell you how I know they're going to be okay. This is not our first time. So when we started growing in the desert, we grew in sand and hot horse manure. That's all we had. In fact, the sand was so hydrophobic, I had to shampoo it. And what I mean by that is I put a cap of shampoo in a bottle, I sprayed the soil surface to allow the water to absorb into the soil, or what we called soil. And we ended up with a huge onion harvest. We had onions for weeks, months, years. It was okay. So these things are still viable at the bottom, but this to me is life. Look at the flowers coming on. It's happy. So when I was talking about transplants doing worse than fresh planted, these peas were all planted about a week apart. These here are my transplants. Look at how burned they are. But I do have new growth coming up. These are fresh planted. I direct sowed these and they're going for it. They've got flowers on it. They don't seem to care. This cilantro was transplanted. This one I direct sown. See the difference? So it's a lesson to be learned for me. I've never experienced that before, but gardening, you learn every day. And you watch your plants. In fact, the best thing for a garden is the gardener. So you need to be in with your plants and observing what's going on. So earlier I was telling you about my tomatoes. So why you need to be in your garden all the time is to read your plants, to see what your plants are requiring. Now when we first put these transplant tomatoes in here, they had turned purple, meaning there was a deficiency, and you can treat that by giving them bone meal. And they were losing their leaves, but check it out. We have new leaves come in on the stalk, and your tomato will grow leaves all the way up the stalk.
This is one of the other places that we know we've been dealing with some hot compost because our green bean row has been replanted several times. So we have in this row actually 3 different plantings of beans. They were planted at 3 different times, and yet all of the beans are about the same size. They've all come up at about the same rate. So we're not expecting any oddities in the harvest at all. It's just that, well, there's a lot of beans in here now. And the reason we kept replanting is that we planted the beans and we waited an appropriate amount of time for them to begin to come up, and they never came up. So we planted new beans. We even came back and amended with some additional compost, thinking maybe that was our problem. And eventually the beans all started coming up, but there's only a few of them that really look right. The vast majority of these beans are just not quite green enough. They should be a much darker and richer green. So that tells us that this compost is still a little bit rich, meaning that the wood chips are still a little unbroken. They're unfinished. And we were aware when we put this compost in here that we might have that problem. Now the reason we were aware is we did our homework. We've paid attention to other homesteaders and other gardeners, people who've been doing this a lot longer than we have. And we've seen channels like Roots and Refuge, when they made their big move to South Carolina, they had a horrible time dealing with the compost that they got. Well, they did some testing on theirs and determined it actually was contaminated. I remember Deep South Homestead also going through an episode of dealing with some grazon contamination in soil that he'd put in his greenhouse. And so I was very concerned when we went out to the commercial market to try to buy compost. We did not have the resources to go and test every bit of compost we were bringing onto the property. Fortunately for us, we had our faith in God. He's been taking care of us, and we were willing to take a risk. But it hasn't been easy watching how these plants are stunted and they're not doing what we expect, and not freaking out and thinking that maybe we have contaminated compost here. The reality is these beans are all well up now. Some of them have their third and fourth leaves on them. If it was contaminated with any kind of herbicide, those beans would have died off after the first set of leaves came on. What happens is the seed has just enough energy to push out two initial, they're not really even leaves. They're called cotyledons for a reason. And those two actually pull the plant up into the sunlight and begin pulling photosynthesis down. But to really photosynthesize, the plant needs a true leaf. Once it puts out that true leaf, it's no longer working off of the stored energy that was in the seed. Now it has to pull all of its energy from the soil. That's when you start to see the yellowing take place in the cotyledon. And if your compost is a little hot, you'll see that the first leaves are going to be yellowed as well. It's when you get to the second and third leaves and how quickly you get there that tells you what the quality of the compost is. Now, the probability is we could have avoided all of this by spending a little extra money on the compost and getting what's known as a mushroom compost. That's not only fully finished, but it's also been inoculated with fungal additives and then left to finish off completely. So rather than us having to wait for the mushrooms to come up, the compost would have come already pre-worked by the mushrooms. These are things that every homesteader needs to be aware of, and you need to be aware of how your plants are expected to react in the soil if you're going to make good decisions about what to do next when you bring commercial products onto your homestead.
So building a brand new garden, you're going to come up with problems, but we know from our past gardens, and we've had quite a few over the last 10 years, that you're going to have some kind of obstacle that it's going to be a learning lesson for you, and you won't do that again. So we do know that our plants are going to be fine. Don't give up. Keep trying, because something is going to work. You just got to keep doing your research and learning. Homesteading's a learning experience. We go out every morning and take on a whole new knowledge on whatever it is that we're seeing in the farm around us. So you just don't learn everything overnight and then think, what, I got it all. You really don't. It's a constant education. So embrace it. It's a good thing. We hope we've helped you out in your compost journey by our trials and mishaps. And we want to know from you, what problems have you seen on your homestead, and how did you overcome them? And if you're currently having a problem, if we can help you out, reach out to us in the comments. That's fine. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to see what's going on with this garden, to see if we overcame our hot compost problem. And until we see you next time, thank you, God bless, and bye-bye.